Okay, let's see if this works properly now. No. Okay.
Nope, time for a new one.
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's this. It's something, it's some interface between them. See, now if I click manually, then all of a sudden this will work.
Oh, there you go.
But I have to click it one, and then sometimes it just stops for no reason. So I don't know what's going on. That's the thing about
Yeah, shake it like
technology.
a Game Boy. Like a
Right.
Nintendo Game Boy.
Maybe. All right.
There's also cheap color.
Okay, let's talk about motivating employees, chapter 9. So this week we're really dealing a lot with theories, because when it gets to psychology, we don't really know how people are motivated, how we make decisions. We don't even really understand how the brain works, what a thought is. There are so many things that we don't completely understand. We have different theories about these things. And a lot of this chapter is going to be learning about these different theories related to motivation. So we're going to start off by learning about Frederick Taylor. He was one of the early management theorists from about a century ago. And he developed something known as scientific management. It's an approach to managing organizations that's very scientific. And at the time, there was not a good understanding of psychology. Psychology was a new field a century ago. Now, Freud was sort of the father of psychology. And he was around the same time as Taylor. So when Taylor was trying to figure out how to manage organizations better, he was looking at it from a scientific approach, kind of like looking at people as machines and not really understanding there's stuff going on in here that you need to take into consideration. Along came Elton Mayo and his team of researchers that made a discovery where they realized that, you know what, we need to consider human motivation. That's a factor in the workplace. We can't look at people as machines. We have to look at them as humans and understand what's happening in their heads. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that happened. So then you have this whole field of research into human behavior that started to evolve mid-20th century. And that includes Maslow's hierarchy of needs that we will be discussing, McGregor with his theories, X and Y, and then William Ouchi came up with theory Z. We'll be talking about each of these. And Herzberg with his two-factor theory that he came up with. So we have all these ways now of understanding human behavior, human motivation in the workplace. And since then, more modern theories have been developed that give us other ways of looking at motivation. But it's all theory. Let's just think for a moment, what is a theory? And we'll be talking about them so much this week. So based on what you know, how would you explain what a theory is?
Idea that's not proven.
Okay, a theory is not proven. That's true. If it's proven, if we're 100% sure that this is the way it is, like 2 + 2 = 4, that's not a theory, that's a fact, right? But how gravity works, we don't really know. There are ideas, we know that it works, right? If you drop something, like if I were to drop this remote right now, we know 100% that it's gonna fall.
Yep.
If it were a helium balloon, we know it would rise, right?
Yeah.
But most things are heavier than air and they will fall. So we know that that's a fact, but how that works, why gravity exists, we don't completely know. There are theories that try to explain it. And we can do experiments and try to figure out which theory seems to be the most accurate. But it's still a little bit of a mystery. So theories are ways that we can try to understand something. They help us to understand something, but not with 100% confidence. So keep that in mind, because all these theories are not necessarily true all the time. So then we'll look at how managers can redesign jobs to help keep employees motivated and keep them from quitting, and other things that they can do to motivate employees. All right. Now, all of this is relevant. If you've ever been a manager, if you've ever been an employee, if you've ever been a human being, you have dealt with motivation. See, it was working, and now it doesn't work. My remote is not motivated to cooperate, apparently. Actually, it has nothing to do with motivation. It's some technical issue. See, if I come over here, I click next, and now it works. I don't know what's going on.
I need to get a new one.
I don't know. Maybe they're kind of expensive.
Yeah, pricey.
Okay, so before we get into specific theories, let's just look at this basic model of motivation. That's sort of universal, kind of applies to all the different theories that are out there. In this model, we could think of motivation like this archer here shooting an arrow. Now, for that arrow to hit the target, the archer has to pull back the bow. They have to exert some energy. And the more they pull it back, the more energy is going to propel the arrow, right? So we can think of that tension from the string of the bow as the motivation. If there were no tension, if they just held the bow and arrow and didn't pull back the string, and they let go, the arrow is just going to fall. But if they create that tension, that motivation, then when they let go, that pushes the arrow forward, right? So that hopefully it hits the target. So think about that with us. If you want something to happen, you need to have enough tension inside of you that you're willing to make the effort to make it happen. Like you got here today, right? You had to want, for whatever reason, to be here. Maybe you wanted to get out of the house, if you wanted to make sure you were present for attendance purposes, maybe you were excited to learn something new, whatever was the reason, you had a motivation to be here today. And that was enough. It created enough tension to get you out of bed, get yourself ready, get all the way here to campus. So you made the effort and you're here. You satisfied that goal. If you woke up one day and you said, you know what? I hate school, I hate my teacher, I don't want to learn, I just want to stay home and play video games.
That'd be unsportsmanlike.
That would be unsportsmanlike, and you would not have had enough motivation to come to class, right? Any questions so far on this basic model of how motivation causes us to take the effort to achieve our objectives? Any questions or comments? Eric.
So there's these extrinsic factors.
Yep.
Intrinsic factors.
Yep.
And those combined.
Perfect. Nice segue. That was the next point. That's where I was going. So what causes us then to be motivated? Sometimes it's something extrinsic. Sometimes it's something intrinsic. Okay, well, those are fancy words. What would be an easier way of distinguishing between extrinsic and intrinsic? What are other words?
Money.
Money. Okay, money would be, what do you think? Extrinsic or intrinsic? Extrinsic, right? Because money is something, well, it even kind of shows it right there, right? Money is something outside of us, like external. So what would be an example of an intrinsic motivator, something that's internal that can motivate us?
Passion.
Passion, okay. a desire for something. Could be a desire to achieve, a desire to feel good about yourself, or to show off, or to impress somebody, or to meet somebody's expectations. All of those have to do with our internal feelings that we're trying to satisfy. So the things that can cause this tension and motivate us can be either external, outside of us, or internal, inside of us. Any,
Oh, slide down.
yeah, that's all right. Any questions or comments? All right. All right, well, let's talk about Taylor. Again, in Taylor's time, he wasn't thinking about motivation at all. He was just thinking about how can companies operate more effectively and efficiently. And he was taking a scientific approach. What he would do is he would come into a company, look at what's going on. He would actually set up film cameras to film the workers so that he could watch the films and study what they were doing. He would even measure how much they were moving. To think, okay, how can they work more efficiently? And then he would make recommendations to the company and say, okay, well, if you change this and change that, your workers will get more done. I'll give you a classic example. He was analyzing these brick layers, right? Their job was all day long, they're picking up these bricks and they're putting them in place. I don't know about you, if I was picking up bricks all day long, I think, that'd be tough on the back, right? At the end of the day, you wouldn't be feeling too good. You'd be slowing down because your muscles are just getting too tired. And when Taylor looked at this, he said, wait a minute, why are the bricks on the ground? Why are we making these workers bend all the way down to pick up these bricks off the ground? Why don't we put the bricks at waist level so that it's easier for them to pick them up? Made perfect sense, right? Nobody had thought about that apparently. So he wasn't thinking about what's motivating the workers, what's going on in their heads. He was only thinking about how can we be more efficient? And he was very effective. He published this book, The Principles of Scientific Management, and many of his ideas and his other contemporary researchers, that were researching management at the time, people like Thale and Weber, we still use those ideas. Our organizations today are based on many of the concepts that these early researchers came up with. However, they really didn't get into motivation at all until Mayo came along. So Elton Mayo had a team of researchers. They were doing research at this Western Electric plant in a city called Hawthorne, which somewhere in the Midwest. And what they were studying is the schedules of some of the workers. They were experimenting with changing the schedules to see how that impacted the productivity. Now, there's a famous story about this, that they were adjusting the lights, but apparently that turns out to not be true. So you might hear that story sometime, that they were adjusting the lights to see what impact it would have on the workers. But from what I've read, they were actually adjusting the schedules. And they found something interesting. Changing the schedules did not seem to have an impact on their productivity, as much as the fact that the workers were being studied. They were changing their behavior in the workplace because they knew that researchers were watching them. And that was the first time that anybody studying management said, wait a minute, these workers are acting differently because of the thoughts in their head, because they're reacting to the fact that we're watching them. We need to think more about this. And that started this whole field of behavioral research in workplaces. In fact, you can get a degree in organizational behavior If you're interested in psychology in the workplace, the field is called organizational behavior. So the Hawthorne effect is just that people who are being observed tend to respond differently, right? If you're at home by yourself, you might dance around and do all kinds of crazy things that you wouldn't do if, you know, a relative was there with you. Or you might, right? But we're often different when we're being observed. So that's the Hawthorne effect. Any questions or comments so far? Yeah, Aaron.
So the scientific method,
Mm-hmm.
would that be used in like fast food chains?
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea, for example, of the assembly line, which Henry Ford really perfected that idea with Ford automobiles, where you've got workers standing in a certain spot and they're just doing the same thing over and over. And that was a very efficient way to build cars. That was classic scientific management. And that's kind of how fast food places work, right? You're the burger, station, or you're the fry station, and you're just cranking out whatever it is all day long. It's very efficient. It's not the most fun, probably. Maybe not the most motivating work to do for most people, but it is very efficient. And that's why actually some fast food chains are automating, putting in robots, because it doesn't take a lot of human ingenuity, right? And it can be kind of boring. So it's easy to automate that sort of work. I saw a video about a fast food chain in Southern California that's almost completely automated. Very little bit of human involvement. Or the Amazon Go stores, if anybody's ever been to one of those. There are no employees running the stores. The employees will stock the shelves. They'll take stuff out of the warehouse and put it on the shelves, but the rest of the store is completely automated. So yeah, those are all examples that are very much using the principles that Taylor wrote about with scientific management. All right, other comments, other questions? All right, let's talk about Maslow's hierarchy, and then we'll watch a video. You might remember this. I think it was day one. I shared with you Maslow's hierarchy, where he was one of these behaviorists who studied human behavior. And he came up with this concept that we've got these 5 different levels of needs, and that we're motivated primarily by these lowest level needs, physiological, and that only when these needs have been met that we can really focus on higher level needs. Again, it's a theory, right? It's not necessarily 100% true all the time, but I think there is some truth here that if you, let's say you were exhausted, you hadn't slept all night, and in fact, some of you maybe feel that way right now, right? It would be hard for you to really focus on other needs. Like your friends maybe say, hey, let's go out and have some fun. And you're like, man, I'm too tired. I just can't do it right now. So you're prioritizing your physiological need for sleep over the social need of going out and having fun. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do that. Some people might say, let's go. I'm exhausted, but I don't care. I'll just have a Monster, or what are the other energy drinks, Red Bull or something, and I'll go have fun.
Arizona.
The iced tea? Or do they have
Arizona
a...
fruit punch.
Oh, really? Okay. Haven't tried that.
You should. It's really good.
Okay. Maybe I will. So you can change the priorities, but in general, as human beings, we're most concerned with our physiological needs, then safety, then social needs, then our self-esteem, which again gets to how we feel about ourselves. And then once all those needs have been met, according to Maslow, we can become who we're capable of becoming. We can self-actualize. So how could a manager use this concept of these levels of needs in managing their employees? How would this information be useful?
Should we have good pay?
Okay, good point, good pay. So where does pay fit in? The money that you make from work, can you use it to buy food, to pay for a place to sleep? Yeah. It can, to pay for a gym membership, right? These help meet our physiological needs. So money does help us achieve these needs. Can money help us feel more safe? Like maybe have a safer car, live in a safer community, whatever, right? Money could help with that. How important is money when it comes to our social needs? Do we need money to have good social relationships? Not necessarily, right? Sometimes it helps, but hopefully your friends aren't hanging around with you just for your money, right? Because then they're not really friends. I hate to tell you. Do we need money to have self-esteem, to feel good about ourselves? It can help. But do you know anybody that really doesn't have money, but they have a lot of self-esteem?
Yes.
Do you know people that have money and have low self-esteem? I can tell you there are a lot of people in that category.
Like insecure.
Yeah, in fact, that might be why they made so much money, because they thought it was going to make them feel better about themselves, and they found out they still don't feel good about themselves. And money can help us self-actualize, but not necessarily. There are a lot of people out there doing what they were meant to do in life without necessarily having money. So money is an important tool. I'm glad you brought it up, Aaron, but it's more important at these lower levels than it is at the higher levels. So I kind of addressed this already. What are some criticisms of Maslow's hierarchy? Again, it's not 100% true all the time. We can each make our own decisions. We don't have to follow what Maslow said. Let's take, for an example, Nelson Mandela. You might be familiar. He lived in South Africa during apartheid, where the majority Black population was oppressed by the minority Afrikaan, which were the Dutch white South Africans. And he didn't feel that that was right. And he protested, and they put him in jail for, I believe, decades. So Mandela, from jail, continued to write, continued to advocate for what he believed in, even though physiologically he was kept away from his family. He wasn't treated well. You know, I'm sure you don't get to eat what you want in jail. You don't get to do what you want. So you give up a lot of your physiological freedom. But over time, he really self-actualized. He never gave up his belief that South Africa could overcome apartheid and become a nation where everybody had equal rights. And eventually, not only was he let out of jail, his dream came true. The apartheid system was peacefully overthrown. And they had this Truth and Reconciliation Committee where they got to hear from the victims about how they'd been oppressed. They got to just talk about what had happened, find out who was responsible, and then have a democratic election. And guess who they elected as president?
They elected Nelson Mandela.
They elected Nelson Mandela, right? So he could have at some point said, you know what? I'm tired of fighting for freedom. I want to get out of jail. I just want to go have my own life. But no, he said, I'm going to keep pursuing what I believe in. I'm going to be who I need to be. Not that he necessarily wanted to be president. I don't think that was his goal. He wanted the end of the apartheid system. So he focused on self-actualization even when he was giving up lower level needs. So we can use this as a tool because in general, people care more about these things. They focus more on these needs. But as a manager, you could try to help every employee self-actualize. Help them figure out what they're good at, how they can advance, how they can improve their skills, not just how they can keep their job and get a paycheck. All right, questions or comments? All right, well, we will pause there. And I'm going to show you a video. This is a longer video. It's 19 minutes long, but it is, I believe it's well worth it.
Went crazy. Then the play-by-play announcers went crazy, huh?
So, we talked about some of the early theories about motivation in the workplace. Here's another, theory X and theory Y. Personally, I look at this as one theory, not two. This came from McGregor. McGregor basically wanted to say there are two opposing types of managers out there. And the theory X manager is a name he gave for a manager that thinks that people are lazy, and the only way to get them to perform is to force them, pressure them to work. That's the theory X manager. You know any managers like that? Kind of like yelling and telling people what to do and not necessarily listening.
That's unsportsmanlike conduct.
It is unsportsmanlike conduct, but hey, it's also real world. There are quite a few managers out there like that because they do get results. They scare people into getting things done. Now, in the long run, from my experience, people don't usually enjoy working for that kind of manager, and they'll eventually quit or do something else, transfer to avoid dealing with that manager. So although it might be an effective short-term strategy, usually not a good long-term strategy. But then we have theory Y, and the theory Y manager, according to McGregor, believes that employees want to do a good job. They want to self-actualize and have good self-esteem. And so what the manager needs to do, according to this theory Y approach, would be give the employees the training, the support, the resources they need, and they'll do a good job. And you might know some theory Y managers as well. Now, I would say most managers are somewhere in between, right? Or maybe they are theory X in some situations, theory Y in others. Or maybe they are theory X with certain employees and more theory Y with others. But it is a helpful model for us to just think about what is the better way to manage people. If you think back, remember when we talked about the different types of power, we learned about reward power and coercive power, right? So the theory X manager is more likely to use that coercive power to force people to do things. Whereas the theory Y manager is more likely to try to appeal to people's self-esteem. Make them feel good about the work that they're doing. Any questions or comments here on McGregor's theory X and theory Y? All right, well, that brings us to theory Z from Ouchie. And, let's see, let me just think time-wise how we're doing.
That's 10:44. We still got like 20 minutes.
Yeah, you know what, let's do our video discussion activity first, and then we'll talk about Theory Z from Ouch. I was thinking, I've been giving you all 8 minutes for this activity. Would 10 minutes be better? Would
Yes.
you like a little more time?
Yes.
Because that's what we do for the grow activities. Let's try that. Let's do 10 minutes now. Get into your groups, come up with a group question, all right? For the next 10 minutes.
Ready. The Giants got played.
So. Okay, Ouchie was also around in the mid to late 20th century. Yeah. And he came up with this Theory Z, which really is not related to Theory X or Theory Y in my view. It just has a similar name. Now, what he did is he studied Japanese management style and American management style. And Theory Z is a combination of the two. He took what he thought was the best from each of those two approaches to management. And so this is what he recommends. That companies should keep employees long-term like they do in Japan, and unlike they do in America, right? A lot of employers don't really care. If you quit, they'll just replace you with somebody else. But in Japan, when you have a job, it's usually for decades. And he felt that that was valuable to organizations. He felt that managers should be thoroughly trained and evaluated like they are in Japan, and not just promoted too quickly like sometimes happens here in the United States. He thought that another thing we could learn from Japan is that you, as a manager, you learn the entire organization. You don't just focus on one area for your entire career. You get to know what happens in these other departments. And that gives you a better understanding of the organization as a whole. So that was another thing that he basically thought we could learn from Japan. Another thing was group decision-making, which we've talked about, how oftentimes we make better decisions as a group than we do as individuals. It takes longer, but according to Ouchie, it's worth the extra time. Now, one area where he thought that America does it better than Japan is when there's a mistake in Japan, the group is considered to be responsible for the mistake. And for whatever reason, Ouchie thought it's better that you hold an individual accountable. That's something, you know, I think that it'd be interesting to know how he came to that conclusion. And then another thing he thought was better in the Japanese style was the company is concerned with the well-being of the worker as a whole, not just in the workplace, but do they have a healthy home life? Are they healthy physically? They're concerned about the overall person, whereas here, your boss just tends to care about, are you doing your job? So Theory Z is this fusion, taking the best parts of the Japanese approach, but maybe not quite as extreme as they are in Japan, the best part of the American approach, and coming up with a way of managing that might work with multiple cultures and multiple countries. So that's Theory Z. And I think that's all the time we have. So I'll see you all on Thursday.
Sure.
Yeah.